Army Painter speed paints. You want them? We've got them. Let's test them out. A few months ago, Army Painter announced their new range of paints, the Speed Paint range. And ever since then, the hobby community has been chomping at the bit to get their hands onto them. As hobbyists, there's nothing more that we like than getting new painting supplies, especially if they work better than the stuff that we already have. In this case, the stuff that we already have is contrast paint and scale 75 instant colours, I guess. Now, I've used a fair amount of contrast paint since they came out, and I've championed them despite all the naysayers saying that it's not proper painting. If used correctly, you can do some absolutely amazing things with contrast paint. The issue there, though, is that the way that they were sold to us is not the best way to use them. So I'm interested to see how the speed paints perform. Now, both paint ranges come in the same size bottles, both being 18ml. The speed paints, however, come in the standard Army Painter dropper bottles, and this is actually my first gripe with them. I think that for paints like this, pots are a much better option. There's less waste, and unless you're creating glazes or something similar, then you're going to be working with neat paint anyway. It's a minor grumble, but kind of funny to have the Citadel paint pot versus dropper bottle argument reversed for a change. I decided to grab some test models and just see how a few of the colours performed before getting any real painting done. A quick trip to Murfield Miniatures and I have my test subjects all ready to go. When I was applying the paint to these models, the first thing that I noticed was how much thicker it was compared to contrast paint. Contrast tends to flow a little better, which is both good and bad. It's easier to manipulate where you want it to go, but it also makes it super easy to get those nasty tide marks that we're so used to seeing. The speed paint, however, seemed to just sit where it was placed. Now, this meant it was a little bit more work to get everywhere covered, but the finish, even on these quick colour swatches, was actually surprisingly nice. Now, the yellow did dry a little bit more glossy than the rest, but that may have just been me using a little bit too much paint. The rest dried fairly matte, leaving a nice finish on all the flat surfaces whilst shading the recessed areas. Colour me impressed. Okay, so I've done a few tests. I've chucked a few of the colours onto some random models, as you've just seen, just to see what they look like. And first impressions are that they look like contrast paints. They're a little bit thicker, so they don't run quite as much. They're a little bit more work to do what you want to do, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, depending on what you're wanting to do. Contrast paint seems to be a little bit thinner, run a bit more, or a bit more fluid. These sort of, they go where you put them and they stay where you put them, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, I guess, like I said, depending on what you're wanting to do with them. So what I'm going to do is, I've got a couple of Marines here primed up with the Colourforge White Bone Spray, the cream spray. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint them both, and I'm going to paint them both as salamanders because that is the Marine chapter that I like to paint. That is the contrast method that I've been using for my salamanders. I'm going to do them both, and seeing if there's much difference by the time you get to the end result. So we'll crack on with that. I'll see you in a bit. Now, over the last few years, I've been working on a salamander army. I use a decent amount of contrast paint on them, which is why I decided to paint two up with these paints today, as I figured that it'd make for a fairly even comparison. Now, when contrast paint was first released, we were told that we could slap it on and it'd do our shading, midtone and highlight no problems whatsoever. Safe to say that that is not the best way to use contrast paint, in my opinion. You need to have some level of brush control, and going slower and steadier helps to avoid the worst of the tide marks that plague so many paint jobs. Now, for this test, I'm going a bit faster as I want to try them both in a more general use, as I imagine that that's how most people will start with them. Now, straight off the bat, I was super impressed with the finish on the green speed paint. Considering how fast I slapped it on, it has dried super even, only leaving a couple of marks where I was a little bit heavy-handed, which is obviously just user error. So far, the speed paints were doing a cracking job of convincing me to switch over to them. I was eager to see more from them, so I carried on to the black sections of the armour. Now, the black contrast paint is one of my main ones that I use. It covers amazingly well, creating some really nice highlights with one coat or complete coverage with two coats. Now, the black speed paint, however, Well, that let me down a little bit. This is the weakest of the set that I used. Poor coverage with one coat, looking more like a light grey than a black. Now I was a little bit disappointed, but hey, most paint ranges have good and bad paint. So I just chalked it up to that and added a second layer to the shoulder pads and the backpack. I left the gun with one coat just to show the difference between that and the shoulder pads and the backpack so you can see in the end result. Now I decided to add a few more details just to finish off the models to show them off to you guys. I used a few more of the contrast and speed paints for various details. I used yellow for the eyes, red and burn for the purity seal, and then finished them both off with a touch of gold just to call the models completely finished. Now these models obviously aren't my best paint jobs. That wasn't the point of this video. I just thought that I'd show off the paints, painting two models the same side by side to give you guys an accurate and fair comparison. I was totally surprised by how nice the green speed paint looked, and the finish on the armor was really clean, and I may end up replacing my warp lightning with that going forward. Now the black, on the other hand, whilst not the best, if you want, well, black, still dried really nicely, leaving a good finish, so it could be useful for light grey stuff. I don't really think that there's any paint range that is bad. With the exception of Korax White from Citadel, every paint has a use and every paint is going to be useful to somebody. It all just depends on painting styles, techniques, and the amount of time that you've got to hobby. So ultimately, it's all down to what you want and how you want to paint. I'm just here to show you how things perform. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. So there you go guys, I hope you enjoyed the comparison between the contrast paints and the speed paints. For me, I think I'm probably going to stick with contrast paints for now. The speed paints have got some good qualities, but I think overall I do prefer contrast paints. I think if I was buying from stock, like now, I probably would go with the speed paints because they are a cheaper option. But I've already got most of the contrast paints that I'm going to be using. I don't use them that often, and they're little bits and pieces rather than full models, and using them as glazes and things like that rather than fully painting a model. So for me, I'm going to stick with contrast paint, I think, but I am looking forward to trying the speed paints out a little bit more, trying them in a few different ways, a few different methods, and just seeing what we can get out of them. But anyway, that's going to do it for today. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, be sure to hit the like button down below and leave us a comment. And if you're brand new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all the content coming in the future. If you want to help support the channel, we've got links down below in the description for our affiliates, as well as our channel membership program right here on YouTube. I want to say a massive thank you to all our current channel members for helping support the channel. You guys are all absolutely amazing, and it really does mean a lot that you guys are helping to support us and help us carry on doing what we're doing. That's all from me, guys. I'll catch you in the next one, and until then, enjoy your hobby.